Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our next episode of Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue. My name is Joe Caruso, and I'll be your host as we dig into today's topic. Well, from news sources to comedians, from friends to advertisements, it seems everyone has an idea of how we should think and live and make decisions. And when everyone disagrees, how do we cut through the noise? How do we sift through all the information overload and choose what governs our lives? As we pray and process these things, we want to offer a resource to navigate some of the day's most pressing topics and questions.
What are you doing? You're out of control.
I'm always out of control. That's good. Jeff, we got the blessing and honor of hanging out with all of Grace Church's staff today.
Yeah, it was fun.
That was a really good day.
Yeah, we twice a year we fly the staff up from their campus, a campus in Georgia, a couple campuses in South Carolina. So we fly them in, and then we try to get everybody in a room twice a year, and it's just a blast.
It really is
to do that. So it's fun.
It was interesting. A couple of our long-standing volunteers that have been at this campus, and then this one was hosted at our Akron East campus because they have they recently moved into their newer facility, and they were like, "Man, I had no idea this many." It's like, right, it's hard to picture. What is it? 8 campuses plus a church plant, 9 locations worth of staff all in one room. It's a neat thing.
It's crazy. Here's something crazy for you. So there's different ways to measure the size of Grace Church.
Sure.
It kind of depends on what you're trying to understand. But if you measured the mailing list, basically, like everybody who would closely to loosely affiliate with Grace Church, you would almost fill Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse.
Oh, wow.
With it. About 20,000. And so it's just crazy because we're broken down, which is on purpose, so that we can be a movement. We're trying to start new works. We're not just trying to have one big location. You don't see it, but every once in a while you get to see it like that, and it's fun, and then it's moving. And what's moving to me is all these people are on the same page. There's from volunteers through campus pastors, there's a united passion to see the gospel make Jesus make sense and see the kingdom move forward. So it's always a encouraging thing. I feel the same. I love our leadership summits we have at the Bath campus. We have different gatherings like that at different campuses, but it's just it's just awesome to look at people that you are friends with and you love and know that they are as bought in to doing with their life what you're doing with your life. It's just something awesome. So you can't live that way all the time, but it's fun in those gatherings, and it's encouraging to see it. So
that's awesome. Well, if we boil down so much of that movement to the individual level, a lot of it kind of rests in this idea that we've been talking about lately here at the Bath campus of who, what, when.
Yeah.
And just how are we uniquely engaging the mission that Jesus sends all of his followers on? And our submitted question this week actually dovetails right into that. And so this person had walked through a recent teaching series we did here called Who, What, When. And they said to use a football analogy, which, Jeff, by the way, I was in a meeting today with Ezra and a couple of others, and I used what I thought was a very simple football analogy.
And
it was over, I was like, you're like the wide receivers coach, and you're like the offensive coordinator. And they just looked at me with deer in the headlights. I'm like, I thought that was a layup.
Yeah.
There's another sports layup for you, or a metaphor for you. But
that was a home run. Nope.
Yeah, it was
hole in one. Nope.
So I said, well, you're in charge of the string section, and you're the conductor. Oh, yeah.
That's funny.
It's amazing. But our submitted question, to use a football analogy, I feel like I'm left on the 1-yard line with our recent series of Who, What, When. They're like, how do I start a conversation about Jesus without turning people off? For example, Jeff, you mentioned at a kid's baseball game with other parents, he says, I feel like in the past I understood that I should wait for God to open the door, and now I feel like I'm supposed to knock the door down. Can you provide some additional thoughts on kind of how to get the ball in the end zone without fumbling it?
It's a great question, and I'll try to help you out with it. So definitely don't knock the door down.
No, yeah.
Let me say this, though, unless it's an emergency. So I don't mean this figuratively, if someone is on their deathbed, knock the door down. like if you're worried that this may be the last conversation you have with them, knock the door down. Now, do it with gentleness and respect, and be careful of that. But there's times that you need to be more assertive than other times. So I try to give you some high level principles, and then I think you guys can pull them through all your circumstances. So I'll give you a for instance. So one of the ways that you can open a door to conversations is your presence. So being a consistent part of someone's life changes the depth of conversation because it changes the depth of relationships. So a lot of times when we think about knocking a door down, we literally think about like the Mormons coming to the door, the Jehovah's Witnesses kind of thing, stuff that we all dread. Somebody trying to get us to buy something as we're going in and out of Walmart, and you feel guilty if you don't support, all those kind of things. And so that's why you tense up and you cringe at it. What we're talking about is living life with people in such a way that you are with them in a ever and deepening relationship. So we talk about pray for your three, which is part of what he's referring to. And pray for your three is pray for three people by name every day, that God will give you a no-brainer reason to share the reason for the hope that's within you. And pray for your three is about consistent relationships. And in taking those to God, being ever present in someone's life, and the probability of them initiating a conversation goes dramatically higher because you're present. Now, so that's kind of number one. Number two, I would say this. I use stuff that we call God talk, right? So I like to think of it this way. If you know me, who's my favorite football team?
Ohio State.
Okay. What furry animal do I not like?
Cats.
Okay. And who do I worship and serve?
Jesus. I was going to say something sarcastic, but then I decided not to.
Okay. So I can see it in your eyes. Yeah. But it's like that's, if you know me, you just know those things. Absolutely. I love my wife. I think my kids are great. I joke around that my only daughter is my favorite. All these kind of things. Like it's the standing joke in my life because that is my life. So when I talk to people, as I'm getting to know them more and more, I talk about my life.
Sure.
And I do the things that I do. They're not weird or cringy. They're just me. And because I have a relationship with them, it doesn't feel that way. So if you ask me where I'm going on Sundays, I'm like, I'm going to go to church. Or if we're talking about getting together, I say this to people all the time. I'm like, well, I can't get together until after church. My family and I will be back from church like at 2. Well, that's a hint that's dropped. I'll talk about reading my Bible. I'll talk about, I wrote, like imagine we're sharing back and forth. I'll say, well, I read this part of the Bible that really helped me think that through, because that's what actually happened. I'm not just making stuff up. I'll ask people if I can pray with them.
Yep.
And if they're crying or hurting, I'll say, do you care if I just pray for you right now? I remember a few years ago, in our old neighborhood, one of the children in the neighborhood was diagnosed with a cancer. And we were friends with people in the neighborhood. And I talked to her dad. I said, can we just have a prayer meeting at my house for your daughter? He's like, yeah, he's a Catholic, so he was, that wasn't foreign to him or anything like that. But I'm like, that wasn't some great act of evangelism. That's just like what I would want somebody to do for my daughter. And so the neighbors came, and some of us were familiar with religion. Some of us are Christ followers, and then a bunch of us weren't. But we all love this kid.
Yep.
So it was a natural reaction. It wasn't a hidden one. And I'll try to give you a natural answer. And sometimes that's just me talking about my life. Like if I went to baseball practice today, and you said, and I was like, oh man, I'm tired tonight. Something we would say all the time. Somebody's going to say, why? And I'm going to say, well, because my daughter left to go to the mission field this morning. I dropped her off at the airport. Well, right there, either they're going to have an interest in that or they're not. So I'm going to give you that answer. And then if you ask me for more, I'll tell you more. If you don't, then we'll probably wind up talking about baseball. If you on Tuesday, Tuesdays are long days for me. And, if I was a Tuesday, like, why are you tired? Well, I lead a Bible study for guys in the morning. And so it just, that was 13 hours ago. And if they ask a question, they do. If not, then, so I just call that God talk. And really what I'm doing is I'm talking about my life and sharing my life with you. The third thing that I would say in response to this question is one of the best ways to tell people about Jesus is to ask permission. And so when you have a friend and, there's not been a no-brainer moment, there's not, God talk is getting nowhere, and you're worried about their soul or something's going to change, they're going to move or whatever, something's going to change in their life, looking at someone who loves you and saying, can I tell you something about my faith? Can I have 5 minutes to do that? 99% of the time, if a friend asks another friend for permission, the friend's going to say yes. So those are three things, and then there are these no-brainer moments where I have led somebody to Jesus on an airplane. It's 1,000 to 1. I mean, I'm on airplanes more than probably most people are. But a lot of times people don't want to talk on an airplane. So I'm not being ridiculous about it, but I was flying home once from somewhere, I forget, somewhere overseas, and we're flying home. And I sat down beside a young lady, she's probably in her early 20s, and I just sat down, and I was like, hey, where are you coming from? And here she was coming from the Olympics in Brazil. And so I was the one, I was like, wow, you're an Olympian? And she's like, yeah. I was like, no way, what do you do? And she was a swimmer. And I was like, who do you swim? So I was the one kind of bugging her. Well, we kind of became buddies and wound up talking. We talked the whole flight. I gave her a bunch of dad advice, basically. And then we wound up talking about faith. And I prayed with her. She hugged me when she got off the plane. Well, that was just a God moment. There's no way for me to do anything about that except be in the moment and be present. So those things happen, and I think we should pray for them and look for them. But the idea of praying for your three is I'm putting we would call that your who. I'm putting a unique effort into my who with my presence. I'm being myself. That's God talk. And then if I kind of run against a wall a little bit, I'm like, can I just tell you? And I found that, and there's probably a million other things I'm not thinking of right now, but I have found that to be very, very effective. And I've never once had anybody be offended by any of that. Now, it's not all these magic stories.
No.
But no one's been offended or like, you're creepy or leave me alone, because I've worked at relationships, I would kind of know that that's what's going on. And I have, I would kind of put that urgency maybe as number 4. I had a guy one time was dying of cancer, and his daughter was super worried about me. She's like, please go visit him. And so I did. And so I'll never forget, he was in his living room in a hospital bed, and I walked in and introduced myself, and one of our actually interns was with us. And just chit-chatted for a minute, and I said, do you know why I'm here? And he said, well, my daughter wants you to talk to me. I said, do you know what about? And he goes, kinda. He goes, tell me. I said, well, you're dying. I said that to him. I was like, you're dying. I said, you probably only have a week or so left to live. And he goes, I know that. I said, well, she's worried about your soul because she's worried that if you die without asking the forgiveness of your sin, that when your body dies, your soul will go to hell. And she's worried about that. I'm saying this to a guy in his deathbed. He's like, okay. I said, so she asked me to talk to you. And I'll never forget this. He looked at me and he goes, all right, make your case, preacher. So I did. And I went through the gospel. And that one does have a happy ending. He accepted Christ. But I'm like, and he died 4 days later.
Wow.
I did his funeral. There's no time to mess around.
Right.
And I'm like, I wasn't a jerk and all those kind of things. And I was invited into that setting.
Right.
But I'm like, I don't really have time for us to be best friends here.
Well, even the timeline you gave, you have a week or two to live. He died 4 days later.
Yeah.
And so, you don't know those timelines.
So those are exceptions to rules.
Sure.
But there are scenarios where you kick the door in, so to say, because if my house is on fire, I want the fire and police department to kick the door in, come get me.
Yep.
So there's an appropriate time where people will thank you for doing that. If my house isn't on fire, I want you to ring my doorbell.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's two things that you underlyingly talked about in all of those examples, Jeff, and one of them was care. Like you cared for these people. This is not a presentation to make. This isn't a 5 bullet point seminar to walk through. This is I care about you, and even to the friend of can I share with you some of the things that are the most important to me? Like you're asking in a caring way, you're sharing those things in a caring way, and there's the old cliche of if you show them how much you care, they'll care more about. I forget the exact way it's going, but if they don't know you care, they don't care what you have to say. And then the other thing is you asked questions. I think of that person on the plane. I'm pretty sure we were on that flight together.
Yeah, was that?
It was coming home from Brazil. We were in Brazil together,
that's right,
and that's where the Olympics were.
Yeah, that's right. We were down there training pastors.
Yeah,
that's right.
Because I remember because you were, I think, were a row over from me, and that's a long flight.
Yeah,
and I remember dozing. I never sleep well on planes because I'm not a small guy. But I remember, I think every time I looked over you, you guys are yucking it up, and I'm like, wow, there must be a really good conversation going on over there.
We had a blast together.
But you started that conversation with questions.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part that I think some of us forget to do. When I think about sharing my journey and story and faith with people, I like to think of it as like a GPS. I know that the end destination is, can we talk about Jesus? But depending upon where you're at on the map, there's going to be different directions to get there.
That's right.
And so if I don't know where you are, I could tell you drive south, drive north, drive east, and you're like, this makes no sense. I don't see the road that you're talking about. I don't see the hills that you're talking about. Why are you talking about Utah when I'm sitting here in Ohio? And so the more you can ask questions, get to know the person, because I think those are where the no-brainer moments really start to spark. There was a guy I was talking with not that long ago, and we small talked our way through life. I mean, hardly ever talked about more than, and one time I was like, hey, buddy, how you doing? And I expected him to say his cliche answer, and he didn't give me his cliche answer. He just gave me a little bit of a look and a pause, and I could tell he was down. I'm like, bro, you okay? He goes, no. And so I started asking, well, what's going on? And about 15 minutes later, he's pouring his life out to me. And suddenly there's all these segues of well, let me pray for you. Let me show you how God wants to interact with you and help you through this. And he's like, I never thought of it that way. I never thought right, because I met him at the place on his map that suddenly all these conversations were making sense. And so if we're not willing to get to know people, which is one of the underlying things that you mentioned through your points, you're going to have a really hard time even sensing those no-brainer moments.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think who, what, when is not about leading people to Jesus. Mm-hmm. It's about helping Jesus to make sense.
Yeah.
And you don't know what part of that process you play. So the scripture says one plants, one waters, another reaps. Mm-hmm. One sows, one waters, another reaps. So I don't know when I'm looking at a who, I want to make Jesus make sense to them. So I don't know if I'm the planter, the waterer, or the one who's reaping. I don't really know that. That's where you're praying and letting, and it's also why you pause.
Yeah.
So if I've planted and people are like, if I'm the planter, I might start sharing Jesus, and people are like, I never even heard this before, or never thought about this. But if I'm the waterer, I might share Jesus, and people are like, yeah, I grew up like that. Well, now my job is to water that seed. Like,
Yep.
I'm helping Jesus make sense.
Yep.
And then what happens is, like this girl that was on this plane, she was ready to be harvested. Mm-hmm. She's like, yeah, this. I'm like, well, I just pray with you. Done. So who, what, when is about intentionally putting yourself in the environment of relationships so that you can sow or water or reap. And I think what happens is sometimes people are like, what's your spiritual gift? Oh, I'm a reaper. I'm like, no, I got the gift of evangelism. Like, no, the Bible said, Paul says to do the work of evangelism, which is sow, water, reap. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I'm a sower. I'm like, no, we're all three. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's God who's determining the process. So that, like this, I grew up in the tradition of like this salesman thing.
Yeah, right.
And it's cringy, mm-hmm. and we all hate it.
Yep.
And God didn't ask us to do it. Mm-hmm. And so you get to be off the hook a little bit that way. If you take it too far and you're like, well, I'm just a waterer. I'm like, no, now you're chickening out a little bit of something. It's sensing what God wants you to do and then cooperating with him wherever he is in that process.
Mm-hmm. If I could add one little mini hot button of mine in these conversations, like we also have to be careful that we're not trying to prove people wrong. We're trying to introduce them to someone.
Yeah.
And I see that everywhere from social media to sometimes, the conversations about people that don't follow Jesus yet. Hopefully not the ones that are face-to-face with people that don't follow Jesus, but they'll, God did it this way, and that's just how it works. And they have all these pithy one-liners or these cute sayings, and it's all about almost being smarter than people that don't follow Jesus. And that doesn't help anyone. Like I can think back to like before I met Mandy, you can just rail on me about why I'm still single, or you could introduce me to Mandy.
Yeah.
And railing on people for why they're wrong or why following their way is not going to work is actually making them hard-hearted. It's making them want to keep you at arm's distance. They don't want to build a relationship with you, as opposed to you helping them see the possibilities and the wonder of meeting the person of Christ.
Yeah. The loving the lost, viewing people with compassion like sheep without a shepherd, caring for them. It's the heart. It's the heart behind why Jesus did for us what he did for us, and I like that idea of like you don't have to be on a mission. We talk a lot about common ground here. Mm-hmm. Like one of the best ways to share your faith is to let somebody else share their faith with you.
Yes.
And so, like I had a friend ask about a friend who was Mormon. And there's other religions, and I'm like, well, tell me what you believe and tell me why. And then when they do that, they'll give you permission to be like, oh, well, that's interesting. I believe this. And it's, oh, like I was talking to a Muslim friend one time, and they tithe once a year. And I was like, that's fascinating because we do that too. Why do you do it? Well, it's all legalism. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, see, we do it. And he's like, well, why do you do it? I was like, it's gratitude. He's like, oh. And so we're sitting here, I'm sharing Jesus with him, mm-hmm. but we're just having a conversation about religion.
Yep.
So it's that stuff and who, what, when. Like to the question, like, how do you get into that end zone? I'm like, the end zone is who, what, when. The end zone is not and then they accepted Jesus. I'm in that place where God is able to work through me however he desires to, and I'm just in cooperation with him. But that's maybe some practical ways to think that through.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of that old Pastor Bobism of meet them where they're at to take them where they need to go.
That's right, yeah.
So that's really, really good. Well, I hope this is helpful to our listener. And even what Jeff said right there at the end, that the end zone is not did they say yes. That's in so many ways between them and the Lord. The end zone is how do you find yourself in a place where you can have these open and real conversations on a regular basis. If you'd like to submit questions to our podcast, you can always do that at bath.gracechurches.org/mixedmessages. And if we can help you take any unique next steps in your faith, reach out. Let us know. We'd love to help you. If you like what you're hearing and you want to hear more of it, make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review our podcast. And if you're looking for a place to follow Jesus, discover what it means into your life, and figure out how you can be a part of these kind of conversations, feel free to join us in person or even check us out online. Thanks so much for jumping in with us today as we continue to see God's voice through all the mixed messages around us. We'll see you next time.